Okay, so today we're going to be talking about 1.8, which is all about combinations of functions. The nice thing about combinations of functions is that it's pretty intuitive. You'll probably already kind of be like, well, duh, that's what you do. But I want to just run through this relatively quickly so that you guys can kind of see what's happening here. So the first type of combination that we're going to be looking at is addition. You guys have seen something like this before. It was actually on your quiz where you have f of x plus g of x. This is just a new notation. So this would be f plus g of x is equal to f of x plus g of x. Okay, subtraction is similar. So f minus g of x is f of x minus g of x. I know it's earth-shattering. F times g of x would be f of x times g of x. And then lastly, f divided by g of x would be f of x divided by g of x. Notice that g of x, though, in this case could not equal 0. So we have to kind of be mindful of some new domain restrictions that might pop up as a result of this. Okay, so just kind of be aware of that. Go ahead and press pause so you have a chance to write this down, and then press play again when you're ready. Okay, so we're going to run through these examples. Again, I think that you could probably do these on your own. So if you want to give yourself a little bit of a challenge, go ahead and press pause and try these, and then go ahead and come back when you're all done. That said, if you are wanting to, you can just follow along with me. So I have f of x is equal to x squared plus 4x equals plus 3, sorry, and g of x is equal to x plus 1. So the first thing that we need to do is say, okay, what's f of x plus g of x? So really, I like to rewrite this out. This would be f of x plus g of x. Well, I'm just going to plug those things in. So f of x is equal to x squared plus 4x plus 3 plus g of x, which would be x plus 1. So when I combine these things, I end up with x squared plus 4x plus x would give me plus 5x, plus 3 plus 1 gives me plus 4. That is my combination of those two functions. The next piece, if you have f of x minus g of x, we'd be looking at x squared plus 4x plus 3. And now probably the biggest mistake that I see on these is that you subtract and you say minus x plus 1, and that's great, except for it looks like all that you're subtracting is the x. So make sure that you put parentheses there because we should also be subtracting the 1 as well. Now when I make my, my simplified version, I'd have x squared. I'd have 4 plus 4x minus x gives me plus 3x. Plus 3 minus 1 would give me plus 2. There we go. All right, next looking at f times g of x. So f of x times g of x. I'm looking at x squared plus 4x plus 3 times x plus 1. And we did this, we practiced this in chapter A. You're going to multiply every term in the first polynomial to each term in the second polynomial. So I do x squared times x gives me x cubed. X squared times 1 gives me plus x squared. 4x times x gives me plus 4x squared. 4x times 1 gives me plus 4x. 3 times x gives me plus 3x. 3 times 1 gives me plus 3. So I'd end up with x cubed plus 5x squared plus 7x plus 3. There you go. All right, lastly, f divided by g of x. So this would be f of x divided by g of x. So I would be looking at I'm going to do this over here. X squared plus 4x plus 3 divided by x plus 1. Now remember, we should always be trying to see if we can simplify. And in order to simplify back from chapter A, we have to first factor. You can't just start canceling out x's and things until everything is factored. So we would factor the numerator as x plus 3 times x plus 1. And I just got really excited because in the denominator I have x plus 1. So I can cancel those out, and I'm left with just x plus 3. Do not forget your domain restrictions. X cannot equal -1 here. Okay. All right, the other piece to this is what we call the composition of functions. So the compositions of functions is basically taking a function of a function. So the way that we would read this is we would read this f of g of x. Okay, so we're always going to work from the inside out, just like we would order of operations. We do the inside of the parentheses first. So I'd first figure out what is g of x, and then I'm going to figure out what is f of g of x. Okay. Just a note about the domains here. The domain of a composite function is only the numbers in both the original domains. So we have to be a little bit careful with this as far as thinking about what the domains are. It doesn't come up too often that we have to worry about that, but it could. So just to have it on your radar. All right, so here we go. F of g of x. Okay, so f of g of x, I would go ahead and say, all right, well, this is, I prefer writing it like this, f of g of x, because that helps me to see that I'm taking the g of x and I'm going to replace it with this x plus 1. So this would be f of x plus 1. Notice I just replaced g of x with x plus 1. Now, this is something that I'm familiar with from previous sections that we've covered. So this would be, I'm going to plug in x plus 1 everywhere that I see an x in my function f. So I would have x plus 1 squared plus 4 times x plus 1 plus 3. And I end up with x squared plus 2x plus 1 plus 4x plus 4 plus 3, or x squared plus, let's see, I've got 2x and 4x, that gives me 6x, and 1 plus 4 is 5, plus 3 is plus 8. You could factor that. You don't have to, though. There's nothing that we need to cancel, so you might as well just leave your answer like that. Okay, go ahead and give those next two, press pause and give those next two a try. And then when you're ready, come on back and you can see my work. For g of f of x, I'd have g of f of x. Sorry, I don't know where my g went. Put that back there. And so this would be g of all of f of x. So x squared plus 4x plus 3. So I'd be looking at wherever in G, wherever I see that x, I'm going to replace it with x squared plus 4x plus 3, which seems a little ridiculous, but that's what I'm going to replace it with. So I'd have x squared plus 4x plus 3. That's replacing my x, and then plus 1. So this becomes x squared plus 4x plus 4. I don't actually need that parentheses there. Okay. Simple as that. Lastly, I'll do this one in green. For g of x, this would be g of x, which is x plus 1. So I'm going to take x plus 1. I'm going to plug it in anywhere that I see x up here in g of x. So I'd have x plus 1 and then plus 1. So really, in reality, this would be x plus 2. There we go. Now, one other type of question that you could be asked with this, and this I don't have listed here, but what if you were asked f of g of something like 2? Okay. Again, what we're going to do is we are going to go ahead and first figure out the inside. So we're going to figure out what is g of 2. Well, g of 2 would be 2 plus 1, which is equal to 3. Okay, so now whenever I see this g of 2, I'm going to replace it with 3. So this is really f of g of 2, which is 3. So I'm going to replace that with 3. So now I can plug that in, and I'd have 3 squared plus 4 times 3 plus 3. So this would become 9 plus 12 plus 3, which would be 24. Okay, so if you're asked to evaluate this with numbers, you're going to want to, again, still work from the inside out. So do g of 2 first, and then once you get the output from g of 2, that becomes the input for f. If you remember, this is going to be a really, really rough sketch. My function cow. Here's his head. Yay, function cow. Okay, that was even worse than the first one that I did. So an input goes into the first cow. In this case, this would be the g cow, g of 2. Okay, and then the output comes out. Well, the output is 3. Now that input, if we think about cows, they graze on the same grass that they poop on. So the second cow comes along, and he might eat up some of that output from the first cow, and then what comes out, he's the F cow, so F of 3, what comes out is the final output of the whole system. Okay, those are really bad cows. I apologize for my drawing, but you get the point. All right. So here's the deal. Today we're just doing no homework. There is a 1.8 assignment. It is not due. It will never be due. So if you would like to try some of these problems, you can, but it won't be due tomorrow. So we want you guys to have a good night and relax and just kind of take some time to yourself. So what are you going to do for the rest of the class period? Well, either number 1, if you have something for another class, you can work on that. Number 2, though, you do have your projects that you could be using this time for. Or number 3, so long as you are being quiet, I am okay with you just kind of hanging and chilling. Just make sure that you are listening to the substitutes instructions and following their rules and their directions. Okay, so your project should be number 1. If you're not done with that, use this time wisely to work on that. Work on something for another class or something else. Okay, have a great night. Enjoy your night off from homework.